goals of No Child Left Behind, the predecessor of this law, were the right ones. High standards, accountability, closing the achievement gap, making sure that every child was learning, not just some. But in practice, it often fell short.
The name itself has always been something to be admired and even desired when it comes to American education. No Child Left Behind. The act of Congress in 2001 designed to ensure, when it comes to learning, every child had the same chance to succeed. Good intentions flawed from the outset, and now history, as the Senate overwhelmingly rewrites the bill that the House approved last week, now heading to the president's desk for an expected signature. However, even with new legislation, there are plenty of people concerned that once again, the intent of this law is something that simply cannot be easily implemented. So let's crack the books and get a reality check, shall we? She is a reporter for The Hill, also a reporter for the 74, covering, among other things, the Education Department. Welcome Carolyn Phenicie to the Hardline, joined by the award-winning writer and president of the Fordham Institute, one of the country's most influential education policy think tanks, Michael Petrelli. I want to thank you both for joining us. And Carolyn, I'm going to go ahead and begin with you. The bill itself is called the Every Student Succeeds Act. Okay, great idea. But at first blush, is it really going to get the job done and ensure that the essence of No Child Left Behind lives on?
Sure. So the main idea with the Every Student Succeeds Act is that it wanted to take sort of the best of No Child Left Behind, this idea that as a nation, we are responsible for ensuring that every child, no matter their race, language, disability status, family poverty or whatever, has a chance to succeed in school. What this bill did, that's the big change though, is it's taking that role largely out of the federal government's hands, sending it back to the states, back to the districts, on the idea that they're sort of better situated to figure out what their kids need and what's best for the kids on the ground.
All right, now, what you just talked about here, here's the measure. It will substantially limit the federal government's role. It bars the Education Department from telling states, local districts, how to assess school and teacher performance. Now, here's Alberto Carvalho. He's superintendent of the Miami-Dade Public Schools in Florida. He says the bill will be more balanced than the one left behind. Here he is.
Obviously, one of the biggest challenges with No Child Left Behind was that it expected 100% proficiency for all students across America by the year 2014. You and I know, and any reasonable person knows, that reaching 100% proficiency is nearly impossible. I think this act is actually a fair balance between enough incentive and consequence. It's just not, extremely heavy on a consequence, as was the case with No Child Left Behind.
So, Michael, let's talk about the feds versus local. Obviously, feds out of it. People are saying that's good. But how do we know that the local districts, the local schools, they'll be able to do a better job?
Well, you're leaving out an important level, and that's the states. In our education system, the states are the ones that have constitutional authority over the schools, and that historically have been the ones who have made the important decisions around how schools are held accountable, with the standards they're held accountable for. And this act very much says to the states, hey, you are back in charge again. Personally, I think that's appropriate. I think it's appropriate in part because the federal government only provides 10% of the money, and yet it seemed to have been making 90% of the rules in the past. This will right-size that. But it's also appropriate because we don't know if there is one right answer on how exactly to hold schools accountable, how exactly to evaluate teachers, how exactly to intervene in low-performing schools, the sorts of things that No Child Left Behind and now the Every Student Succeeds Act are all about. And so now we're going to allow for states to experiment, to try it their own way. It also means we're going to shift a lot of the fights over education policy from Washington to the state capitals.
All right, now I'm going to catch on a word that you said right there. You used the word experiment. Carolyn, states now have to develop standards to make the students, quote unquote, college and career ready, and Congress is leaving it up to the states to define what that means. I'm not sure as a parent I'd be real thrilled about having states experimenting with my child's education.
Right, so the idea was this was really a win for conservatives who were upset at the federal government's role in the Common Core. This will let states sort of figure out, again, the best way to deal with their kids.
But how do we know we can trust the states? I guess, and again, I'm just going to play the parent role here for a second. How do I know that I can trust them to make the right decisions?
Right, so the idea, I think, is that, again, they're better situated. Parents, everyday citizens have a bigger ability to really affect state policy than they do, trekking out here to DC and trying to influence the role of the education department.
Michael, is the biggest thing in here maybe with all this that finally we've learned that you can't just pigeonhole something into a one-size-fits-all, that here in America you have to look at the differences that go on regionally and statewide and community-wide?
You do, and I think the current administration never had much respect for the concern about federal overreach. And this act is very much a reaction to that, a backlash. It's ESSA. I like to say that means Education Secretary Stay Away Act. That's very much what this is about, is saying the Education Secretary, Arne Duncan, has had way too much power over the last 7 years. His successor, John King, is not going to have nearly as much power thanks to this law. And I think actually Democrats and Republicans on the whole are happy about that. They want the power to rest with governors and with the states. And now we'll see if they're going to exercise responsibility that comes with that power.
10-second short answer then, Michael. Is this overall a good thing for students and teachers?
I think it's a good thing for students, teachers, and it's good for education reform, in my opinion.
Carolyn, same thing to you.
I think so, and I think it's important to note as well, there are still some federal guidelines and rules in ensuring school quality, so it's not completely left to the states to run amok.
What we had certainly was an absolute frightening governmental mess coming from the Beltway. Now at least we have something that we might be able to teach our kids, and that's something that is all important to this country. Michael Petrelli, Carolyn Phenicie, I want to thank you both for joining us very much. I hope we talk again. Hey, better than a cup of Joe. Forget the cup of Joe. How about a drink from the water cooler? That's coming up next right here on the fastest 60 minutes of news, The Hardline.